Zoom calls where you have up to 100 people on. You can see them all on the screen.
Good afternoon and welcome to the second in the DCD series of COVID-19 Transforming the TV Industry webcasts. As with all industries, COVID-19 has forced a huge shift in the TV space. We want to explore this further, delving into three key areas: entertainment, viewers and consumer electronics. And the DCD, as part of our TV Transformers research, felt it was important for us to look into this. So last week we looked at the impact on entertainment and demand. This week we're looking at viewer behaviours, and next week we're going to look at staycation and the impact on the device side, the consumer electronics device side, that will take place at the same time on Wednesday next week at 2 p.m. So today we're going to discuss how COVID-19 has been playing a part in viewer behaviours. And what I'd like to do now is just hand over to our illustrious team of panellists who are going to discuss the subject, starting with our lead analyst from EY, Martyn, who will introduce himself.
Thank you very much, Richard. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Martyn Whistler. I work with EY and I focus very much on the latest trends and innovations that are happening in media and entertainment. And as you can imagine, that's pretty much monopolized at the moment by one very clear subject. And spend a good amount of time at EY focusing on some of our thought leadership, some of our market surveys, etc., and planning to take you through some of that material at the beginning of this webcast.
Hi, I'm James Gibbons. I manage the Discovery Networks business in the UK and in Ireland. And we look across our 6 free-to-air channels and 12 pay-TV channels, as well as a streaming service called Dplay. So have got quite a holistic insight into the way the viewing has changed in the last few weeks. So look forward to going through that.
Hi everyone, my name is Dan Finch. I'm the co-founder, chief commercial officer of Simplestream. We provide a broad range of OTT services for broadcasters, for hybrid TV in the UK, as well as telcos and content owners, distributors, sports rights holders that want to reach audiences via perhaps non-traditional TV means. We've had a very interesting month, or nearly 2 months now, of getting an insight into viewing behaviour from a lockdown perspective and how that's working for our customers.
Hi everyone, I'm Stuart Jones. I'm the head of product for the ITV Hub and Hub Plus. Obviously, the focus for ITV is very much in the UK, so I'm looking forward to chatting today about the impact of COVID on TV behaviour in the UK.
Hi everyone, my name's Leah Kurta. I'm Innovation Lead at I2 Media Research. We are a strategic research consultancy very much focused on R&D based at Goldsmiths, University of London. And we use user research and psychology to inform the development and deployment of technology and media products, platforms and services and content. We've got over 25 years experience applying psychological user research methods. So I'm looking forward today to talking about the psychological side of the impact of COVID-19 and how that's sort of changing viewer behaviours. So yeah, looking forward to being on the panel.
Great. Just before I hand over to Martyn, who's going to take us through his research, the format for this afternoon is Martyn will run us through his research and the panelists will ask some questions along the way. If I could encourage you all to contribute some questions as we go throughout that, and then there'll be 2 opportunities, one partway through the slides and one at the end of the slide for us to have a kind of wider discussion, and we'll put your questions to Martyn and the panelists to see whether we can tease out any of your concerns, points or particular areas that you want to highlight. So without further ado, Martyn.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you. So essentially what I'm going to do for the next few minutes is share some research that EY has done, which we refer to as our Decoding the Digital Home or the Digital Household research. This is going to be a little bit broader than just TV, but it's going to set some context, and then we'll dive into more of what's happening around the TV space as well. Just a little bit of context on the research itself. So Each year at EY, we produce a survey of UK household attitudes towards what we call TMT services, so telecom services, media and technology, and that asks a whole range of different questions about your broadband service, your customer service, etc., your attitudes to mobile, smart home. And we do we can deep dive into various different operator analysis, so comparing, for example, Sky to Virgin to BT, etc., etc. We're obviously not going to go into that level of detail on this call, but that's something we do on an annual basis. Obviously, when the COVID-19 crisis sort of took root, as it were, in the UK, we decided to do a little supplemental survey to find out if there's additional behavior changes taking place as a consequence. And we put a small sample into the field, and really asking specifically around behaviors and habits as a consequence of COVID-19 and the lockdown itself. And this was actually conducted, it says on the chart, in April, but it was conducted just at the very end of March. But and selfishly, one of the things we're planning to do is update this research again in the next couple of weeks, now that unfortunately lockdown has sort of bedded in and will be around for a little bit longer. So I'm going to selfishly use this opportunity to see what issues are important to people, what kind of questions we get in, and then help to frame our next round of research. But yeah, today is really a snapshot of what we have, and then hopefully a lively discussion with the panel. But we obviously have a lot more detail to go through. As Richard mentioned, two parts of the presentation. The first part, we're going to look more broadly at consumer behaviours. So, what are people doing? How have things changed in the past few weeks? And then a shorter piece, second piece, where we'll look a little bit at what people think is important to them and what really matters from a sort of media technology point of view at the moment. So, I'm just going to take a bit of a whistle-stop tour through this and hopefully raise a few questions that we can get into in the discussion. So, as I mentioned, our survey is much broader, so a little bit of contextual stuff up front. I hope you can see the points on this. Look, we were looking more generally at how consumer behaviours have changed, and not just within the media space. We'll deep dive into media in a moment. So. Obviously, clearly, things that are experiencing a huge uptick. Browsing of the internet, over 40% of people say that they're doing more and more of that. Social media uptick has been huge. I think, and then as you look down the list, everything across the board is experiencing more and more usage in terms of digital services within the home. Couple of things to draw out. Obviously, there's some variability around these depending upon what they are. So working from home, for example, is obviously having a bigger impact on younger, middle-aged audiences for whom that has a direct effect. But what I thought was quite compelling was the age split here for some of the other activities. So, for example, browsing on the internet and even using social media more, we're seeing a lot of uptick there across all the demographics, and not just younger audiences who are maybe at home with less to do. I think the slides are skipped. So, okay, right. Wanted to just dive a little bit into what people are doing for the first time. So rather than just an increase in their behaviors, but what is it that they're actually doing it for the first time? And we should probably have added to this list something along the lines of webinars or web conferences, but maybe that's something we'll have to stick in the next iteration. What's quite compelling about these behaviors, you can see that, we put broadcaster VOD on this list. We were quite specific, I should say, with everything on these charts. We within the questions that we sent out in the questionnaire, we did frame some of these and give some examples. So, for example, where we talk about streaming services in some of the charts, we do explicitly refer to Amazon Prime and Netflix and others. And when we talk about BVOD, we do talk about iPlayer and the Hub services. So things that are up there, video calling, as you'd expect, is a huge uptick. But what was really quite compelling is what the over 55s are doing here. Across so many of these metrics, they're doing things for the first time. 12% of people in the over 55 age group say they're looking at broadcaster VOD for the first time. Now, 12% might not sound like a huge number, but actually that's not that insignificant. That I feel is quite compelling. And what we may be seeing is a bit of a catalyst effect here, with a sort of digitization of the older generations taking place by default. And I think we see that played out across all of the data. The other thing I'd pick out on this chart, which again is not around TV specifically, but looking at the online gaming space, the thing that struck us around this is we know from the data, and we know anecdotally, that gaming is gone through the roof. There's more and more hours of gaming, more and more more and more consumption. But what we're not seeing is a lot of new people taking it up, and that became a real question for us as we went through the results of this research, and we'll touch upon it again in a minute. The extent to which people are doing more with what they have, as in consumption is going up, but there's not a lot of new people coming to the party or taking new subscriptions out or new services, versus they are going out there and they're trying things for the first time. So we'll come back to that in a minute, but it was compelling to see that gaming, only 3% of people are new to gaming, and yet we know that there's a huge uptick there in consumption. So let's dive a little bit further into some of the media behaviors, and look specifically at some of the streaming services and other content services. So as a consequence of COVID-19, has your household done these things? So used more TV streaming services more often? Absolutely. And as I say, we explicitly were talking here about Netflix, Amazon Prime, Now TV, and others. Traditional broadcast channels seem to have done well, again, across the board in terms of the age demographic. So, you might often expect older age groups to gravitate towards some of the PSBs, but we're seeing a lot of uptick there from younger audiences as well. And one that I wanted to just call out here was the free online services. And I think this is quite compelling. We literally just done this same research in the US, and I got the results back 2 days ago. We're going to publish those shortly. I'm afraid I'm not going to give too much away in terms of the numbers at this stage. I'll have to join a future webcast for that. But there's a huge uptick in the use of free services, free trials, etc. And I think this falls into two buckets. In this question, we were specifically asking about things like YouTube, Facebook video, for example, or Facebook Watch, sorry. And that's where a lot of the uptick is. But what we're also seeing is a number of service providers, TV service providers, started to give away channels for free or for discounted rates, giving people access to content that they previously would have to pay for or might be behind a sort of paywall. Interesting to see how that trend plays out, and whether once the genie is out of the bottle with some of that content, how easy it is to put it back in again. If people are getting more and more content for free and more channels for free, and not just for a period of a couple of weeks, but potentially extending into a couple of months or even 6 months or beyond, what does that look like when you start trying to charge for those channels again? What does it look like from a competitor dynamic when you start to charge for those channels again, and your competitor comes along and says, well, we'll offer you those channels for 6 months if you take out a 12-month subscription with us. So we're watching closely to see whether this is sort of representing a true sort of shift in behaviours and shift in price sensitivity around some of this stuff, or whether you can, as I say, put the genie back in the bottle. And there, as you see as well, more consumption of BVOD. What I wanted to do now is just switch briefly to look a little bit at the PSB. At the PSBs. And I'm sort of going back out to the general level here, but we asked a question about how well people are coping or how well people think organizations are coping during the COVID-19 situation. We know it's an exceptional time. It's totally unprecedented. And so how are different organizations managing? And you'll see that the PSBs feature number 3 on that list, only second, and only very closely second to the NHS. We got a 77% favorability rating for the PSBs. And I think I saw some separate research where it was up to about 80%. So, they're doing extremely well, and I don't mean that to sound in any way patronizing. I think we all know the great content that's on there, the breadth of content, the depth, the objectivity, etc. And doing much better than, or doing a little bit better than some of the other media that was on there that I would just call out. So traditional print is much further down the list. Social media is much further down the list. So PSBs are really holding their own there and doing very well. I must just on this chart just point out the very British nature of the responses. We asked people how well they thought they were doing themselves. And of course, that came out top on the list. Everyone thought that of all the organisations, they themselves were coping the best. And of course, we asked them how other people are doing, and that came out bottom of the list in terms of the general public. So we all think we're doing exceptionally well during COVID-19, and everyone else is having issues. A lovely, very sort of British response there. So diving a little bit further into the PSBs, and as I say, there's a lot going on in terms of the service offerings that they've come up with. But one area that we looked specifically at was news consumption, which has never been more important than it is right now. A lot more reliance on PSBs for news content. So just around 40% of people are turning to the PSBs more than they have done in the past. Look, we know that the consumption of news is unprecedented. You know, the press conferences, Queen's speech, et cetera, are getting the kind of viewing figures that you would normally associate with some sort of exceptional sporting occasion. So the numbers there are hugely impressive. And again, we were quite impressed that across the demographics, there's a fairly consistent uptick in where the PSBs are. I know that when we talk about online news sources, which is second on that list, we could quite easily be, make it a catch-all for a lot of what the PSBs are doing and what local news sources, etc. But there seems to be a sort of gravitation towards TV channels as the sort of de facto place to go and get your COVID-19 news from. So moving away just now from looking at the sort of the channel mix and the consumption mix, let's look a little bit at how some of that demand is being satisfied from a, coming back to the point I made earlier when I talked about the gaming. Are people consuming more content on their existing services, or are they actually paying for new things and going out and getting new subscriptions? And so I was struck. 77% of people think that their content package, their TV services in whatever guise that is, whether that's pay TV or whether that's streaming services, believe that it is sufficient to meet their current needs. So 77%, 3/4 effectively say that we think we've got enough to manage what we want. We looked a little bit down the list and asked a few related questions around, and I should just clarify, only 5% of people say that it's insufficient for their needs, which is, is an incredibly small, a small number. We then asked about, are you, as a result of COVID-19, subscribing to new TV services, streaming services? Again, we defined those as things like Amazon, Netflix, Now TV, etc. And there was some uptick there. But it remains a relatively small number. 7% overall are subscribing to new streaming services, and only 3% in total, and that obviously varies by demographic, but 3% of people are subscribing to new pay TV services. So, and I'm sure my esteemed colleagues on this panel will have some anecdotal information from their own experiences at ITV, Discovery, and elsewhere. But what we're seeing is that consumption is really seems to be to a large extent satisfied by the existing providers, and there's a lot of reasons for that. People may be cost conscious about spending, lots of uncertainty going on, and I think that's reflected in the stat we've got in the top right there. About 85% of people say they are no more or less likely to switch their TV service in the next 6 months as a result of COVID-19. I think everyone feels that for whatever reason, personal reason or whatever, that they're pretty happy with what they've got. So there's a question mark in our mind there around the monetization of this extra demand, and I haven't touched upon the advertising market in terms of the monetization piece, but I think we're going to get to that at some point in this conversation. And then just lastly, the $1 million question or the $1 trillion question is, do you think that your behaviours have changed fundamentally and permanently as a consequence of the COVID-19 situation? Are you going to revert back to type once things get back to normal, or are you planning on doing things differently indefinitely? And here we see that 17% of people overall, and actually, again, relatively consistently across demographics, so obviously skews to the younger audiences who have been taking up more services. But 17% of people say that, look, we think that this has permanently changed our behaviours. I have put a stat in there from our US survey, which is 37%. So the answer we got there was over twice what we think it is in the UK, and we can explore a little bit maybe some of the reasons for that. Now, 17% again doesn't sound like a huge number, but I actually think that's a pretty significant proportion. You wouldn't expect it to be 50, 60, 80%. So 17% actually sounds like a lot of people are going to be doing things a lot differently once we come out the back end of this crisis, and the new normal will be very much different from where we are today. Richard, I sort of prattled through that. I know there's another section we want to go to, but in the meantime, do we want to switch over to some questions and see what people's reactions are?
Yeah, Martyn, thank you very much, and very interesting. One of the questions we had come through was about Disney Plus. Was there anything drawn out from your research that kind of suggested that people might be subscribing additionally to Disney Plus, or is that just something that was going to happen in the market anyway?
We didn't specifically ask about Disney Plus. We really just focused much more on the streaming services. So I wouldn't like to say. I mean, we've all seen their pronouncements about uptick. I think they got about 5 million new subscribers in the first week or two across Europe. So obviously people are subscribing there in big numbers, but we didn't look at it explicitly within our survey, I'm afraid.
Okay, good. That's helpful. I thought maybe we'll go to our panel. James, what are you seeing from your side of the business at Discovery, and are people mopping up the content they got, or are they hunting and drilling deeper into the on-demand services?
Yeah, well, it's interesting actually, Richard. I was fascinated by the chart that Martyn just showed there, where the proportion of 18 to 34 whose viewing habits, TV viewing habits may change, or choices may change, was above 20%. I think it was quite a bit bigger than some of the other age groups. And one of the fascinating things about the trends now are the significant changes in viewing groups that are traditionally difficult to reach. And to see those changes in that 18 to 34 group, which frankly is as we all know, not a growing cohort in the TV business, is really fascinating. And to see how that will play out. For us, I think that our position in the market across the channels we have on free-to-air and pay, and indeed our streamer Dplay, is really about powering people's passions. So we are trying to serve certain interests, that people have, communities of interest, if you like, who are into certain types of content, interests that they share with others. And we've seen as a result of of the lockdown and what's happened, a surge in particular categories. And it doesn't take a lot to work out what those categories are. Obviously, we have a food channel, so people are doing a lot more. Well, I don't know about a lot more eating, but a lot more cooking, that's for sure. And cooking and maybe a lot more eating as well in some cases. And yeah, indeed. And the way that they're cooking from scratch ingredients, experimenting, getting more members of the family to actually get in the kitchen and get going with things. So we've seen a big surge in linear viewing, right? So that's on Freeview on food. Tripling, I think, in web traffic on foodnetwork.co.uk, and that's mainly recipes. All kinds of things that you wouldn't normally, people might not normally be looking for, how to make smoothies and more sort of, off the wall stuff that perhaps people are looking for inspiration. So we've seen big uptick in food, both linear and digital. Also, of course, in the home category. So we have another Freeview channel called HGTV, and that's Home and Gardens Television. So that's focused on the home. And of course, that's where we all are right now. And, we don't have options beyond the home at this point. And so, we launched a show called a Sarah Beanie show called Renovate, Don't Relocate, and which obviously at this stage, I mean, there's not going to be any relocation going on. So, there's a lot of interest in that show, and a lot of people, and it certainly, I think, resonated more and had a broader impact than it would have otherwise. So we're seeing, I think, viewing in the home category, and then also in things like, classic cars, where we have a lot of content on classic cars. And even though people aren't out there driving them or shouldn't be, the fact is that, it's an aspirational hobby. The cars are still there. People apparently are still buying them. Someone was telling me the other day. I'm not quite sure how they're actually getting the cars to their homes, but I suppose, it's people are still into their hobbies. And so we are seeing that viewing picking up in specific categories. And that's all also reflected in the growth of viewing on Dplay, which is the as you were mentioning, as Martyn was mentioning just now, free online streaming, that's up double digit, or it's up double since last year in terms of viewing. So yeah, I mean, those are some of the highlights that we're seeing.
Good. Stuart, I've been glued to ITV Hub various evenings this week. What patterns are you seeing, and any questions for Martyn, particularly on the PSB front, I guess? Are there particular channels that you're homing in on?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting few weeks for us as well. I think if someone sort of told us this was all going to happen, and there was a kind of mystic foresight that this was coming and we'll all be in for 9 weeks, I think largely we would have predicted what is actually happening at the moment with what we're seeing with our figures. And consumptions are up, our MAU growth is up as well. We have Hub Plus, which is our kind of ad-free service as well, and we've seen some interesting trends related to people's behaviour with that as a service as a whole. And so, for us, I think it's a case of, now we're into this, we are trying to sort of lean into it better than we obviously, no one knew it was coming, so we couldn't do much about it to begin with. But seeing kind of viewing increase on weekdays and kind of incrementally on weekends as well. The differentiator between weekdays and weekends used to be stark in comparison, but because people's time is kind of really overlapping with days are running into nights and mornings into evenings and Fridays into Saturdays, it becomes very difficult to realise what an actual TV schedule should look like. And I think we're getting better at reacting now to what the trends currently are out there as well. Similarly, with sort of co-viewing and solo viewing as well, we've seen increase in figures in both. And, the co-viewing numbers have gone up for us. So I think if it came down to choosing content to fit in with what we're seeing at the moment, it would look very different. And I think, every broadcaster's saying the same thing. I think from an ITV perspective, it's quite difficult for us, given the nature of how we make programmes and get them to air quite quickly. Look at Coronation Street and Emmerdale. It's very difficult to react to the change of COVID and what that's brought in and try and reflect that in the TV schedule as well.
Stu, sorry, can I jump in and just ask a question? Stu, how do you manage the sort of the duel between, there's so much consumption out there, so much demand, just feeding the beast by putting so much content out there for people to consume, and yet holding some of it back, because we are going to go back to a world where people are going to have to not expect everything all of the time. So how do you find that right balance?
It's really difficult. I think that the real challenge is not having an end date in sight for this as well. So it's really difficult for us to be able to forecast when content is going to, carry on going back into production again. And so we're just having to kind of look at daily updates and trying to make sure that we're not going to run out of content, a wealth of content we want to surface at this time as well. And what's really key for us is making sure that we still deliver stellar content out to people, and we still market it in a way which we originally intended to do so as well. So it's not BAU for us, because every day is a different set of circumstances. But what we are trying to do is make sure that the quality content is still viewed at the right moment in time for the audience to digest that as well. We don't want to kind of take away from other IPG services as well. We want to try and maintain a consistency, because viewers expect that consistency. And I think the interesting thing that you pointed out in your piece around the confidence that people have in the public services is that there's a familiarity that comes with them as well. People turn in at 6 o'clock to watch the news because they know that's when they're going to get their kind of update. So we're not trying to be, I would say, overly clever with content. We're just trying to make sure that we lean into what's going on at the moment. We still deliver content on a regular basis. We paramount, and that we give the opportunity to react to the changes as and when they kind of come in.
Stuart, I've just had a question come in from Simon Davis from Discovery, panicking that Love Island might not go ahead in summer. What do you think the impact on the hub summer consumption might be if you're not able to go ahead with Love Island?
I think it's very difficult to know. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen yet with that. It's impossible to say. It's too early. I think obviously we look at every single possibility and eventuality of what would happen. You know, there's several scenarios that we're trying to consider at the moment. And, you know, look, it's not like anyone has got a kind of Love Island alternative just sat on the shelf waiting to be used. You know, it's something which, if it wasn't there, of course, it would be, you know, impossible really for us to kind of hit that peak again. And I think what we would do is make sure that there is the audience that would typically come into ITV at that time are catered for. I believe that would be something which we would certainly try to do. But you know what? I think when we're all allowed back outside again, I think Martyn's report is really insightful about where we are currently now indoors. What's the attitude going to be like of people when people want to go back out again? You know, what would happen if we put Love Island on the 1st of August and that was the day that the pubs reopened? So I think there's so much consideration to try and make, and it's a big programme for us that we're going to make a very kind of informed decision.
Good. I'm just going to go before I go to Leah, who's going to tell us a little bit about the psychology of all being locked down or locked up, as some people are calling it. Dan, your streaming business must be smiling at this a little bit.
Yeah, so we're very much on the other side of the fence, and we are across our broad range of customers. We're privy to data in terms of perhaps the consumption across our advertising supported customers. So we're seeing pretty much in line actually with the PSB's reports that Martyn was mentioning then, a large uptake on those kind of like catch-up services on platforms like Freeview Play and YouView. Interesting from our perspective, we also have some other customers that have, I guess, more of a niche offering. So I know Discovery have a great portfolio of content, from cooking to cars, obviously documentaries, etc. But we have one customer called Dan Snow, who's a historian, and he's really kind of like carved out this niche. We've seen huge growth of that as a niche SVOD service, where we're seeing a strategy where lots of content is going onto sort of YouTube as a way to promoting the service, and then they're doing lots of files and subscriptions to encourage take up during this sort of period. And I think we're seeing that as a pattern where lots of content gets put out into a free environment in the hope that people will convert, or there'll be a trial subscriber for this month or for the next couple of months. So it's interesting to see how people are viewing. I think the ThinkBox study is still around about 4 hours a day of TV, but now with the arrivals of the Disney Pluses, the Peacocks that's coming, Quibi's just launched, which I downloaded this morning and watched an episode of The Stranger just to see how that's working. And then you've got other things like Together at Home concerts. These are all video services, but I guess the challenge maybe for broadcasters is competing with time. There's only so many hours in the day, but actually all these other services, and it's kind of keeping the content fresh and engaging for them to sort of stay relevant, actually.
Thank you. Leah, I know you've been looking at the escapism, stress release, kind of social engagement. Where do you see the kind of patterns, and are they going to, one of the things that we're asking ourselves are kind of what's temporary, transient and permanent in these behaviours? Do you have any insights?
Yeah, of course. Some really interesting comments there from from what people are watching and how they're engaging. I mean, we know from over sort of 20 years of research into sort of how people consume media, that, essentially with TV viewing, whether that's on traditional platforms or on mobile, people are viewing in order to sort of serve basic psychological needs. So whether that's, like you say, like escapism, or whether that's to structure time. I think it's interesting what James was talking about with regards to people watching more sort of recipe, wanting to get engaged in food channels and learn new recipes. It's clear that we're going to the TV in order to help us structure our time. I think a big one, and something that Stuart picked up on, was around the social aspect. So we know that people are really missing at this point in time, obviously, social interaction, and something which is hugely difficult to get back are those kind of incidental conversations, or in the workplace, what might be called those water cooler moments. So I think there's a big opportunity for, certainly in the short to medium term, for the TV industry to maybe that a bit and incorporate social components with watching TV. So some good examples of that are, for example, Secret Cinema, who've recently done Secret Sofa, where you dress up with your friends and maybe have a Zoom conversation during viewing. So it's about kind of helping people to fulfill their basic psychological needs. So whether that's connecting with friends and relatives, or whether that is to kind of escape the current situation. I think it's also interesting, though, Martyn obviously highlighted that people say that they themselves are coping quite well, but don't necessarily view that the general public is coping with the situation so well. Again, that's quite interesting psychologically, because it kind of it relates to how people may sort of schedule their broadcasts. Emotion. People may escape that is reflective of their mood. So that's something that we're particularly interested in and exploring at the moment, sort of how broadcasters in the industry can respond to general mood of the nation.
Just before we go back to Martyn's research, just one quick question's come in for James. What do you see the impact kind of on the sports channels and kind of sports lifestyle channels? And I guess this links very much to Leah's kind of appointment to view and kind of water cooler moments as well.
Right. Well, I think clearly the sports business is unrecognizable now compared to what it was, with the lack of live events. But I think that when you look at a service like Eurosport, which is where we have most of our sport, Eurosport is not just about the scheduled event and the particular game or event, that match that might be on. It's known as a home of cycling with Tour de France, certain kinds of two-wheel motorsport, tennis, and so on. So actually, you have people coming there who are into that category anyway. It's not necessarily that they'd love to see, obviously, the live game that they're going after, but they're also interested in the history of the sport and in other aspects. So what we've done is we've tried to pull from the archive some of the greatest moments from, for example, Tour de France and tennis Grand Slams. But not just to repeat them, but to bring either the athletes from the time who participated originally or current on-air talent to participate and host and curate those events. So that's one category which, if you like, serving the broader interest of that fan, not just a live contest. The other part of it is looking at new live categories that might be suitable for the era that we're currently in. And of course, esports is an interesting area. I think it's one to watch. Esports may take on a different dimension now, given the options and given the limitations on the performance of sport. We are looking at how we could potentially feature more of that in terms of actually providing live sports coverage.
Super interesting. Martyn, can you take us through the rest of your research?
Sure, happy to. Thank you. So excuse me. Only really a couple more slides. But what I wanted to do in this section is is look at a couple of things that are important to audiences and to consumers. So looked in the first part really around how are the behaviours changing and whether that's likely to be sustainable. But there's two things I wanted to call out. I mean, there are many things that are important to all of us at the moment on not just in a media and technology space, but far more broadly. But there's two things I wanted to pick out. And the first one is around reliability and resilience. And the issue here is, we ask a question, how important is resilience and reliability versus speed in terms of your connection? So this is not specifically around TV, but obviously it has ramifications for what we talk about around, streaming services, for example. And you've got sort of 2/5, 40% of people overall say that they now value reliability and resilience more so than anything else. This comes back to this overarching point now that generally as consumers we value access to things over ownership of things. If we can't get hold of what we're looking for, or we can't get access to it, then it becomes a problem for us. So maybe this chart explicitly is a nod to any of the sort of CTOs on this webcast, but I want to make a general broader point that reliability is important. And we saw the reaction to that very early on in the process when a lot of the streaming services said we're going to downgrade to SD services and move away a little bit from HD. I'd be interested to hear some of the panelists' thoughts around that. But it's essentially you have to be able to get the signal to people, otherwise they switch off very, very quickly. And there's a little caveat at the bottom there, which I won't go into too much, but 11% of people say that the COVID situation has made them more interested in 5G. I mean, 11% in that context seems a little bit small. So that message around the power of 5G and what it can do for people maybe needs a little bit of an extra adrenaline shot. If people are seriously thinking about moving into faster speeds and faster networks. The other thing I wanted to pick up on, aside from the reliability, is the issue around trust. And trust is a continual issue. It's constantly there in everyone's mind. I think it's one of the reasons why the PSBs are obviously doing very well at the moment. One of many reasons, perhaps, but the sort of the belief in turning to BBC, ITV, others, for that objectivity. Not that you can't get that anywhere else. Before the questions and comments start coming in, but trust is important. We used as a proxy for trust. We looked at fake news. As I say, we took quite a deep dive into news within our research, but we looked at fake news and. There's quite a proportion of people saying that we think that there's too much fake news out there and it needs to be better regulated. So you've got about 50% of people overall saying the government could do more around fake news, and more, in fact, 64% of people saying that social media platforms themselves could do more around fake news. We asked a separate question, which I haven't got in these charts, but 24% of people in the 18 to 24-year age group trusted social media less now than they did before the crisis. So a quarter of young people said, I trust social media less now than I did before. So, and that 24% compares to an overall number of 17%. So there's a little bit of variability there. So what we're starting to see is younger audiences are not just going out there and feeding on content, but actually becoming a little bit more discerning about what they can rely on, what is valuable, what is trusting, and starting to have a perception around those sort of things. And I think that's important. So the two things I wanted to pick out here was the reliability, which is as much a sort of technical network issue, and then the trust piece, which is as much around how you manage during this process so that you don't become sensationalized, you don't throw content at people, but you continue to manage a credible, trustworthy service. And I also stuck these two things in because I thought they might get a bit of lively discussion going, but we'll see how that goes. So Richard, back to you and the panel.
Thank you very much, Martyn. Just before I go to the panel, I had a couple of questions that have come in from the delegates online.
Yep.
One question about the kind of the home show versus the live show, and particular disappointment in Graham Norton's home show, apparently. But I guess we don't know as yet, and it might be one for the other panelists to answer, whether these home shows, have I got news for you? One I found an intriguing experience. are having an impact and getting the audiences that they would if they were live. I don't know if anyone's got any comments on that. Also, one for you, particularly Martyn. Do we know how well the claimed behaviour aligns to the actual behaviour?
Yeah, I mean that. Yeah, well, okay. Well, on the first one around the home shows, I mean, I will probably defer to the guys who are producing the content and distributing the content. I know the first episode of I Got News for You got incredibly good figures. I think the best in 3 years. But you know, it's hard to extract out of that the fact that everyone was at home, we're not going out on a Friday night. So, you know, I'm sure they have others have a view on that. In terms of the real behaviour versus stated behaviour, it's something that is always a bit of a conundrum in any of these surveys, and I think you need to look at it a little bit on the basis of each individual question, and that's going to sound like a little bit of a cop-out. But some of the things like whether there is going to be a permanent shift in people's behaviour, we simply won't know until we get there. But the numbers are significant enough to suggest that there's going to be a certain amount of movement, whether it's the 17% we have overall, or whether it's 10% or 30% or whatever. You know, we know that there's a good chunk of people out there that are going to be doing things differently once this normalizes. Around some of the things like spending and taking new services, you know, there we can do a little bit more of a comparison between the actual consumption figures and the real uptake figures versus what people are saying, and to be honest, we're a little bit early in the process to do that. Although as we start to see companies announcing more of their financial results and their performance figures over the next couple of weeks, we're expecting to be able to tabulate, you know, what is real behaviour versus stated behaviour. So at the moment, I'll resist on that, but we will hope to have more of that over the next few weeks.
Yeah, very helpful. Should we go to the panel? Any comments on the home show versus the live show?
Yeah, just quickly to come in on that one. I think for, you know, the home show I think it's a novelty, and I don't know, Lee, maybe you've got some insight into this, but the psychology behind something which is new and being sort of gaining popularity. But ultimately, you know, the quality isn't going to match that of a live show, and all the people that go into making live shows, I think if it did, it would really undervalue the production effort that actually goes into creating those kind of moments on television. And, you know, Graham Norton's a good example. I mean, the number of people who are involved in the production of that show versus, you know, a man and a webcam is very, very, very different. And so I think it's really challenging for content creators to not try the home show format. But I find audiences, you know, will probably see the initial one as a novelty. You know, the first Anton Deck Saturday Night Takeaway we did without an audience was popular because people wanted to see what it was going to be like. If we carried on down that route, I'm not sure the kind of, you know, the popularity would have continued with no live audience. So for me, I think it's a psychological question that comes into play, where it's what do we do once we get beyond the novelty of the home show? Is there a prolonged experience? It's not radio, it's a very visual format we're in, and so we need to make sure we have that quality there as well.
I'll comment on that. Certainly, you know, when novelty is going to be a big factor in what's encouraging people to view these different formats. I think the other thing to bear in mind is that globally, we're probably feeling relatively forgiving at the moment. Everybody's in pretty much the same situation. The expectations of what is possible to produce, audiences understand that you know, that full production is not going to be possible during the time, and I think people want a sense of the familiarity. But I think it's also really can be seen positively a good opportunity for the industry to think about testing of new formats. So whether that's the home show format or whether, as I mentioned earlier, kind of ideas of integrating social aspects of interviewing, or whether that's kind of having kind of emotionally intelligent scheduling and broadcasting. But I think there's an opportunity to test the boundaries of what's possible, so that in the future we're better prepared and have kind of exciting new formats for people to engage in. another comment on that, just kind of in terms of attitudinal shift and sort of how that plays out over the long term. We see, Martyn, as you mentioned in your presentation, people are trying things now for the first time. And I think because of that, we're going to see an uptick in digital literacy across the board, and comfort with digital. So within that kind of thing of new formats, people may be more curious, and that's something that behaviourally may sustain, because people build relatively quickly during this time and build new.
Oh, we seem to have lost Leah there. Shall I go to, there's a few more questions coming in. One question actually on advertising. Young people use a lot of ad blocking software and tech. Clearly with broadcast, they're going to be watching more live TV. Do we think there's any impact on kind of more acceptance of advertising? Maybe this is one for you, Stuart. Have you any thoughts?
Yeah. No, I think it's always interesting, isn't it, when we look at the model that funds the programs that are being made and people's kind of reluctance to want to be part of, really the model that goes into making the programs. More ads get watched, more money gets generated, more programs get made. I'd like to think that people would make that association at the moment of supporting through advertisement. I'm not entirely sure yet. Well, I've not seen yet anyway any kind of statistics or insight to really to back that. I think, it's interesting for us, like I mentioned before, about our Hub Plus model, which is the ad-free ITV experience. And I think the challenge we have as a service is that people actually want to waste more time than they do want to try and save more time. And for us, the ad-free experience is all about not being interrupted and ensuring that you can, your time is your own. And I think that's very much what we sell the proposition as. But people actually want to try and fill time window. They don't want to reduce that time for them. So I think it's an interesting time for the ad market, which is a gross understatement, as we all know. But I think people's perception of advertisement could shift off the back of this. It'd be interesting to see if it does.
Right, useful. Any other questions from the panelists to Martyn or points?
Can I throw a question back at... Sorry, go on, Dan, please.
Yeah, no, it's just picking up on your slide, Martyn. Thank you. Just picking up on your slide, Martyn, on that sort of reliability part, and how broadband is to be coping with the situation, given the amount of uptake of video streaming services, and so that's interesting in itself, because I think that's actually where we were 3-5 years ago, where you couldn't do 200,000 simultaneous streams because everything was going to fall down. Nowadays, those sort of numbers are quite commonplace. So I can see, perhaps an acceleration to IP delivery for broadcasters. They benefit, of course, from that return path data that they get. And then on the other point on the HD to SD or reduction in bit rates, the more cynical side of me would say that it's to save cost rather than there's a nice PR story to say that we're supporting the infrastructure, but that would be obviously increase in video streaming. There's an increase in costs from a CDN perspective, and one way to mitigate that is to reduce your bit rates by a quarter. But they're making that cost saving to you. So yeah, that was interesting. And in terms of the uptake of all these new services, the Disneys, I can see that the DTH platforms, cable, even the free-to-air platforms will have to, I guess, be in a position to be able to grant access to their users for all of these apps, so that everyone can sort of stay relevant there. And then on. Again, interesting to see about the trust perspective, how perhaps the younger demographic are less favourable now to social media. And it sort of comes back full circle to news channels and the PSBs, where they are a trusted source of information. And that seems to be where people are sort of coming back to viewing news live for the daily updates.
Yep.
To see where we are. So a few observations there.
Dan, I think your point around the network speed and the fact that telcos seem to be managing pretty well is well taken. And if you remember the earlier chart where we had the ranking of how well people think that different organizations are coping. Broadband came out in the mid 70s there, I think it was, in terms of 70% favorability, which is pretty impressive, right? I mean, they've become a bit of a sort of a backbone of access for everyone, almost as much a sort of social service as an infrastructure service. And by comparison, actually, in the US, exactly the same question came out around about, off the top of my head, I think it's about 64%, 66%, so about 10% lower. So yeah, certainly in the UK, if we're focusing there, then the telcos seem to be doing very well. And I absolutely take your point about streaming services and cost savings and all the rest of it as well. But I think generally, the whole that decision has worked out very well for pretty much everyone involved.
Yeah. One point to make is we've clearly at the DG been talking to a lot of our members, and our kind of satellite and terrestrial TV operators are seeing pent-up demand for the kind of wave of sport that we're likely to see next year. So I guess, and maybe this is a question for James from me, we're gonna have so much sport, we're not going to know what to do with it next year, aren't we?
There is certainly the risk of that events being pushed back, but not all the events will are suitable for postponement. So unfortunately, I think we will see some loss along the way in terms of what actually moves over. But ultimately, I think that it's the fans will still be there. There may have to be some rejigging of schedules and cooperation between leagues and between rights holders to make sure that it's a more balanced experience. But I think it will be a little tight, but hopefully a one-off challenge for the industry.
Yeah, it'd be a good problem to have, I guess. Another question that's come in as the pandemic pushed younger audiences, which I know they were so desperate to make sure they grow towards the PSBs. I don't know if anyone's got any comments on that. Leah, maybe from a kind of psychological perspective, it seems that public service broadcasting is back in fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting when you consider that younger audiences are losing trust in social media platforms with so much misinformation being spread. So clearly, younger audiences are wanting to engage with more trusted platforms and providers. And so the PSBs really kind of come in here. So it's a good opportunity, I think, for the PSBs to test new content formats and kind of engage younger audiences. Something that we'll be doing actually this week, that's looking into the different kinds of contents that people are most interested in, whether that be kind of very short form content or whether that be content which is accessible via perhaps the television, but then also accessible online and via mobile, so that you get a kind of an experience that really kind of transcends all those different media platforms. So that's something that we're very happy to talk more about once we have the results in. But yeah, absolutely, it's a great opportunity to engage with younger audiences at the moment.
I think partially, I mean, it's a huge part of it is an awareness issue, because what we found is that content isn't inherently old or young necessarily, right? And if we take the same set of programs and put it on our streamer versus on the channel, you might have a reduction average age of 15 or 20 years in the consumption. The issue is that the places where younger viewers can watch online content is fragmented. The options are fragmented, and therefore, it's not obvious where they are and easy for them to find. So part, I think, of what we're going through now is a process of awareness and knowledge in terms of where younger viewers can watch their content. So it'll be really fascinating to see if that permanently changes anything.
Good, thank you. Dan, one of the questions that's come in is this point about kind of accelerating the digitization of some of the older demographics, or some of the demographics that typically wouldn't have either been using multiple devices. You mentioned Quibi earlier, or necessarily be using the internet to watch television content. Are you seeing any of that across your services?
Yeah, we're just seeing a large uptake. I mean, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. So we're just seeing a real large uptake across all of our services, whether they're a telco or one of the free-to-air channels in the UK. They're seeing 300% usage from that. We get the benefit, I guess, of seeing as well what devices people are viewing on. And that's certainly on the up. And I think just in general, people, the older demographic that are now, familiar with Zoom, how they're all working. And I think, to Leah's point, it will drive this sort of digital uptake, for those sort of services. So from our side, yes, we see that. I think as a punter myself, we're now doing sort of family Zoom calls. We did a quiz night the other night in terms of some user generated content there. We even had Matt Dawson gate crash our quiz night because he was promoting that via his Instagram account. So suddenly all these celebrities and people that are now sat at home wondering what to do. There's a whole new wave of things to do. The Royal Albert Hall are doing home concerts. So I think all these things will drive change, and it just accelerates that digital sort of movement, as it were.
Good. It's been a really interesting and well-informed panel, and thank you for everyone that's engaged online. I thought it might be fun for us to finish with a prediction each of what might be a slightly more permanent trend. And to kick it off, I think the one trend that I think is going to be more permanent is some of the older generations continuing with digital technology as a kind of communication mechanisms with their family, but also that will help drive them towards drilling down into some of the content that typically they may not have seen more normally. So I think we'll certainly see the kind of ongoing digitization of some of those elderly populations. James, do you want to give it a punt next?
Yeah, sure. I think that what we will see is the kind of mainstreaming of some sports, some live sports that previously perhaps were not so much in the public eye. And we might have whole new categories in the future as a result of this sort of viewing shock, as it were. So one to watch.
Leah?
Yeah, I think my prediction is that audiences are going to become a lot more curious, partly because they have the time, but also, again, as we've said, about that trust in PSBs, and also kind of wanting that escape and being curious to find that. And the other thing, I think there will be a return of kind of appointment TV, so scheduling, watching together, whether that's with members of your own household or members of other households, to really kind of get that social connection back there.
Stu?
Yeah, for me, I think it's, I'm worried that the trend's going to be that my family carry on wanting to speak to me over Zoom every week and do a quiz. That's my fear. But I think from a perspective, I think the trend will be, a few of you have mentioned things I was going to talk about as well in terms of kind of the older demographic, but certainly from a channel perspective, I think we'll be better prepared for this again. I don't think we'll ever go into this as blind as we've gone into this time. I mean, no one ever foresaw this happening at all, not just at a kind of UK level, but global level. So my prediction is that next time, inevitably, something like this probably will happen again at some point in the future. There'll be a contingency which is more aligned to customer demand.
And finally, Martyn, your predictions.
Sure. Always good to go last with these things when most things have been sort of chipped off. I think couple maybe. One I would pick out is builds on your point about the older demographics. I don't just think we're going to see older people doing more digital things. I think we're all going to be doing things more digitally. We've seen a lot of reaction around things like call center, customer service type behaviors, people doing self-service things, digital things online, chatbots, etc. And I think we're going to see people who have already become more tolerant of those kind of things embracing them much further. I think that was an expediency in reality that had to happen. And then maybe another one which is a bit more glass half full and maybe gives us a nice little feeling at the end is, I think people are becoming a bit more socially conscious, and we're seeing that in the way that they consume news and the type of news that they're going for and the type of services that they're adopting. So I think there's a sort of a general awareness that you can't just go after the sensational all the time, but there has to be some sort of sense of purpose and social good behind it, which we can only hope that endures, I think.
What a wonderful point to finish on. Thank you, Martyn, for your presentation, and to Dan, James, you, and Leah for your insights and input, and for all of you online that have shared questions with us and engaged with us. Next Wednesday, 29th of April at 2 o'clock, we are going to talk about staycation and the impact on consumer electronics devices with Jack Weatherall, Principal Analyst at FutureSource. In addition, on the 6th of May, we're going to be presenting a preview of our State of the Nation UK digital television innovation, which is a piece of research we've been doing with FutureSource, talking across the industry in the UK to look at where innovation is happening, the economics, the number of people involved, and more importantly, where are the sweet spots for us to really look to the UK and how we might continue to lead the world in some areas of innovation. So thank you very much for engaging today. And hopefully I look forward to you all joining us next week. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.